Welcome back, everyone, to episode 2 of Nighthawks with me, Sadie, and Tat. This is, of course, your one-stop shop for the weird and wonderful world of artistic curiosities is probably the best way to explain it. We have a bit of a jam-packed episode today, don't we?
Yeah, we do. So I've always been interested in discussing photography as like something like picking up a theme and basically seeing how photography has kind of portrayed it and helped kind of like creating a documentation for it and helped change it sort of and model it through history. And connecting from the past episode where, you know, our favorite guest, William Mumler.
Yeah.
So he was obviously talking about spirit photography. If you haven't catch up the first episode, you can do so. We'll leave a link somewhere. But anyways, we're going to be seeing how, very interestingly, a lot of different photographers, a lot of different work has been done by this, and how photography is today more than a document. It helps illustrate how people have been capturing very different themes, or in very different ways, the subject of, you know, passing.
So our first subject today in our jam-packed episode is going back to our friends, the Victorians, like the OG Goths, as I would say. And it's something that I've kind of been fascinated in for quite some time. I'm sure a lot of you guys are probably aware of it because some years ago there were some viral posts about the Victorian post-mortem images. Now, a lot of those images have since turned out to be false. There were a lot of photos taken of the deceased back then. However, images where people are standing up or the dead are supposedly posed with their alive living relatives are actually not real because, you know, we'll delve into that a little bit later, but just from the get-go, a lot of those are false.
Spoiling it for people.
I'm spoiling this from the get-go, so I can disappoint you now, so it's not going to be a surprise disappointment later on. Now, the Victorians, yes, last time we were talking about something that was probably not real. This time, we're talking about photography that was very, very real. I mean, it's one of the real things. It's like the only guarantee in people's lives, I think, as dark and depressing as that is. But it actually is something that's kind of come back into fashion these days. But as I said, we know that the Victorians used photography to capture everything, to document it in a way. Yeah. So they wanted to, like, you know, basically document something, document a loved one after they passed away, because often people passed away very young from various infectious diseases. You know, we were talking about tuberculosis, you know, we've got typhoid.
Yeah, I mean, back then, I suppose that people our age would be considered what we would say, like today, as we view a middle-aged kind of person, we would be middle-aged back then, even though, you know, we're quite young by today's standards. But
some of us.
Kind of. Okay, it is. We're still young. And like, I think people back then, I mean, the sort of normal life wouldn't be as like, well, the normal length of life wouldn't be as normal as we would consider it today by like 80s, 90s.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of people were, you know, dying before their 40s.
Yeah.
And, you know, especially infants were particularly vulnerable to infectious diseases. I mean, you're talking things like cholera, measles. You know, if you caught something like this before the age of 5, it was essentially a death sentence.
Jeez,
I know it's
you're
not
giving the happy punches to people.
I know. It's a morbid curiosity, but you have to think that there was a lot of a long mourning period as well, and often there was only there would be, say, there's only one day for a funeral. The funerals usually took place on Sunday, so I think it's only the last Sunday of a month or something. So you're talking potentially 3 weeks. Where a body, up to 3 weeks, where there's you know, a deceased relative in your home. And it was very important because I suppose the Victorians believed that if you surrounded the dead body, you were sort of easing the passage to the next world. I mean, if you think about it, I guess it would be a lot easier.
I mean, I suppose like it is just hard for me to kind of grasp that because obviously of my background and like how we live these days and stuff. But I suppose that when we look at the Egyptians, they used to do like all these big feasts. And in many places in the world, there's like parties and stuff, like people actually celebrate. And I think it is more, they look at it as more like a passage.
if you think about it, I mean, Victorians, they were probably constantly in mourning. So particularly when a young person died, a photographer would be brought in, and usually the deceased was posed as if they were sleeping.
Gotcha.
And especially, they might have some like flowers around them. But any of these images where they're standing up or they have a stand, that's not a deceased person. That's a big misconception. Because we're talking about a time when exposure time was very long. It took a while to get an image.
Yeah, gotcha.
So that's why often a stand would be used to help a living person maintain a pose. So all this talk about there being, and I'll drop some sources in the show notes, but a lot of that is just someone seeing something, running with it because they thought it was a gas idea. But I don't know. I mean, there's no way a recently deceased person could be propped up simply by a stand. And even I think, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I think rigor mortis sets in and then it kind of lessens after that. So you're talking about very, very heavy, almost dead weight, pardon the pun.
Well, really dead. Post-mortem photography, I have to admit though, guys, like I don't really know much about it. It's not that I've never been that curious, I suppose, like to dig in, I have been curious about certain things that we'll be talking about it later in the episode, but yeah, post-mortem photography, but it is interesting from my point of view that I like to, like I said, and I think photography does this very well, which is if these photographs didn't exist, it wouldn't help us understand and comprehend how we have once perceived certain concepts. Even like when we talk about beauty, like how, feminine beauty has been perceived over time, because we have pictures that show like what women were, or men for that matter, like what the fashion was back in the times, etc. So photography is kind of like a proof of it, and also it's kind of like a document, but in a way participates in it by kind of providing context and sort of like proof to it all.
I mean, it definitely does. It gives us a better insight into not just, I suppose, the technologies available at the time, but also the attitude towards big things like death. For us, we are removed from death, and I suppose kind of around the 1930s or so, the funeral industry was becoming quite big. So it became the whole thing where the undertaker comes.
I've said this before, it's one of the best business you couldn't be in.
I mean, you're guaranteed business.
That's the thing. Like, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to play like on the dark humor, but it is true. Like, there's a fundamental truth about it. There's always going to be clientele.
Yeah, there's always going to be.
They are clientele, but they will be. I'll be a client.
I'm going to be a client in some way.
The whole thing is very interesting to me, and I think I'm getting into it as we move into the episode.
That was my plan. So the whole idea was that once, I suppose, the funeral industry sort of kicked off, and then, in that kind of the early to mid-century of the 20th century, we've got vaccines, we've got different medicines, everything is being produced.
Oh, by the way, let me just do a little kind of note, because I used to watch this show, and I think people, if you're interested in this, you might actually like it. It was called Knickerbocker, or The Nick. It was about the Knickerbocker Hospital, around that, and it was with Clive Owen, and it gives a lot of really good insight to like how doctors operated around like the 1910s, 1900s. And it's very, very good. And he talks about like, addiction and all these things. And like, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting glimpse into the society that we are actually talking about today.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my note.
No, but like now I forgot what I was saying and I want to watch that.
Sorry.
Which, as I was
saying, the funeral industry was changing.
Yeah, well, I guess it was kicking off more, and I guess some people like quite elaborate ceremonies. But as well as that, we were talking about advancements in medicine and science. So and then with funerals, we're talking about people are going into hospital, often dying in hospital. So there isn't that, I guess, close connection with our deceased, because I mean, if you even think about it now, even when people do pass away at home, They're,
I think it's because back in the day, like everything revolved kind of like around the family and the family home. Say like, if you needed a doctor, like when you watch movies, it's easily to get this or grasp this. Like today we'll go to the hospital, but back in the day, the country doctors, it's still like this in many places, but the country doctors or like, it's everything kind of like community wise. Today we are able to live longer. I think the whole thing is changed. I think it's just sort of like a nice way of giving some context. Because we might actually and explain why we probably look at these pictures and feel like, oh wow, this kind of a weird one, like for me,
You can also understand as well, I mean, especially if someone passes away before the age of 5, there may not be an image of them, so they wanted a Memento Mori, I guess, a kind of an image of their child so they could remember what they looked like. And nowadays, I suppose, because I mean, a child is snapped a million times the second they're born. Even beforehand, you're getting 3D images of babies before they've even been born. So that it's hard for us to imagine. We don't know what we've never had the need. So I guess that's kind of, you can see all these different reasons why it was phased out, but also why we're almost like fascinated by it now because it is so alien.
It is definitely very alien, but then again, like, you're right. I mean, today, like, we can take pictures of anything and everything. Our phones are so, like, glued to our hands.
Omnipresent.
Yeah, and I think it's just sometimes it might take away from the moment that you're living. And now I'm not saying, go and photograph a funeral. But what I'm trying to say is that, especially when the example of kids there, I think is super important. I feel as though these days, like, I see so many of these things on social media. And personally, and this is my own opinion, and if I have children, I would not be putting them on social media. I'm very private about my life. I mean, God knows that I have received my fair share of weird messages over the years, like weird, like strange. So like for me, I wouldn't be comfortable that my child receives, or whoever is seeing pictures of my child. I think when they're older, they can do whatever they want. But I think I can understand at some point why certain celebrities, and I'm not in no way comparing it, but I'm just saying I can understand why certain celebrities like don't like to show their children and kind of cover them and stuff.
Well,
because
they don't have consent really, because I mean,
exactly.
if you think,
it's more about that.
A child can't consent to so many things.
Yeah, exactly.
So if they're not, I mean, I'm going to just use a kind of, I guess, I suppose, safe for work kind of example, but they can't vote. Yeah. So why would you let them why would you decide that they can put be on Instagram? Their... I mean, I don't want to go into the kind of nefarious reasons why someone would use the image, but I do get it. Yeah. I know. And I think kids today, like when I compare, you do see like those TikToks and like these kids are about 16, but they look like they're about 25 with the way they do their hair and makeup. And I was like, I just think of some of the disposable camera images of me and my friends at around the age of 16. I mean, I'm talking long jet black hair on me and these fair paddy eyebrows. I mean, come on.
I had no friends. That's how we're going to segment into the next
sob story now. Well, you're about to have one less.
Play the violins. Play the violins.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting the episode here, guys and gals. I just wanted to make a very brief mention to MPB. MPB is the sponsor of this podcast, and MPB is the largest online platform where you can buy, sell, or trade your used photography and filmmaking equipment. Now, for this month of March, we have teamed up with MPB and we are offering a exclusive code, and the code is Nighthawks. So if you go to mpb.com and you're selling to MPB during this month of March, you can put on the code Nighthawks and they'll give you a 5% boost on whatever you're selling, on the total value of what you're selling. Now, this code is valid only for first-time customers, and also your transaction needs to be superior to £100. This code is valid through MPB UK, MPB EU, and MPB US. And you can find more information about this in the description of every episode, in whatever platform you're tuning in, and also in the show notes. So if you're curious, check it out. And we would like to thank MPB for giving us a shot here, helping us with this podcast. We really appreciate it. And yeah, without further ado, let's go and continue with the episode. But look, going back to it, I feel as though like these photos are super important for us to understand how things were seen back then. And I think like you mentioned there, like with the 19 kind of like early 20th century, things change. And then I'd like to pull us to something that I thought would be very interesting to talk about in the sort of segmenting from that, which is like the whole when kind of like death starts being kind of sort of like an interest of the population. And I don't mean this in like your family member, but I mean it like with crime photography or things that happened that we are all sort of, curious.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way.
Morbidly curious, I suppose.
Morbidly curious. Like, I read that before, I think this time before the 1930s, so morbid curiosity, more or less around that, started with Jack the Ripper. And basically people were, it's a bad way, but fascinated because nobody really could understand why someone would do something like that.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's kind of like that idea of, like, say, an illustration is not enough. Like, people are like, what does it look like? They want to know the details.
Yeah. I mean, an illustration is merely, I suppose, an interpretation, whereas
Yeah.
people want to get that little bit closer to the dark and disturbing.
And this because I'm going to be talking about a photographer now. His name is Weegee. And I actually have done a video on my channel. So guys, if you're wanting to look it up, I'll probably link it somewhere here or in the show notes. And basically Weegee made a name for himself as a press photographer. Now, press photography was kind of, on the rise, I suppose, because there was more demand for information, and people wanted to know.
We're so hungry, aren't we, for information?
I know, we are.
Can't get enough. Look what's happened.
Here, photography becomes more objective. Becomes about like, okay, this crime happened, I'm going to photograph. And then if we look at some of the pictures of Weegee, and Weegee had this thing, he had basically a police radio. And basically he used to sometimes arrive even before the police so he could photograph and snap. Of course, for him, and this has got to be like, he was not interested in being respectful. He was there to make money. He never said photography was like, he never quoted photography as being like an art or anything. He just said like, look, I'm in the business of making photographs for the money. Like somewhat along these lines. I'm paraphrasing.
Well, at least he's being honest.
I think the perspective here is super interesting because it fuels what we have seen today, which is like kind of this morbid curiosity.
It's a total, it's, for me, I know whenever I look at kind of anything to do with true crime or anything, but I know it's very popular, especially among females, because a lot of the time it's females that are the victims. And people, it's almost an element of knowledge is power. So if I know that all these things can happen, maybe I'm safe from it. I don't know if it's about that. But
you're carrying a pepper spray or something.
We don't have pepper spray in this country. It's illegal. But I have hairspray. I don't know if that's, that could really
be... a knife and a rope.
A
pistol for the occasion.
Yeah,
walk around.
Where did you get that? I want one.
No, it's interesting. It's definitely interesting because I feel like, and I'm going to put this on the show notes, when we look at the figures, the numbers, and these types of numbers, right? The money numbers that Netflix and, YouTube and all sorts do when it comes to crimes or kind of shows that are about true crime.
Yeah,
it's insane. It's like on the millions and millions. And even I remember reading that, I can't remember if it was the LA police, some police in the States, they actually have a podcast about crimes and stuff like that, and they have a lot of people tuning in and listening. I suppose it's kind of like you get informed, but it's also I don't know. People are very intrigued probably to know what leads someone to do something like that.
Yeah, and I guess that also kind of leads into the whole knowledge is power thing. It's like, okay, well, if this is why this happened, maybe we can stop it. I've been to binge watched kind of Mr. Ballin, Coffee House Crime, love it. I'm addicted. So it's almost, and I could be doing it for, an hour while I'm cleaning the house, whatever, listening to all these horrible things. I definitely don't feel that affected by it. It just shows the curiosity.
That begs the question, when is it enough? When can we say draw the line to photograph certain things?
For me, I'm kind of the opinion that if you're there with a camera, there is a certain level of free will. It's kind of up to the individual, but it's kind of, if those photos exist and then you seek them, does that make you culpable? Like, I mean,
I think it makes you somewhat of an accomplice there.
Okay.
Because you're putting fuel in the fire. Because the way especially internet algorithms now work, the more peak interest it shows whatever you're researching. If there's like 20,000 people researching something, the likelihood of it appearing to other people, you know, to resurface a sort of a topic or to be more shown to people that might be potentially interested, because we know that we all are a number in the algorithm. We all have profiles that are, you know, basically created around what we search, what we talk, what we like to see, what we like to hear. And so I think the likelihood of it being spread it's wider. Now the thing that I'm saying is that, you know, you're not conscientiously, you might not be like, but the fact that you have that sort of hint of going and looking, it's kind of like, you know, it's giving that something attention. And by giving that something attention, whether it's positive or negative, it definitely will be shown.
Yeah.
I think though, like in here, it's good that we're talking about this and putting on a photographer's terms. I think I wouldn't be so inclined to photograph certain things. I think it's important to document, but I think I just couldn't bring myself to, even if I photographed them, to put it out there. Okay. Like one example I can give is I've actually done a video on this, and it's on the night 11. This photo was titled "The Falling Man."
Yeah.
And basically, like in that video, which by the way available for members of the channel, if you're a member, you probably checked it out. I basically talked about the fact that, you know, the photographer said something along the lines of, you know, he had to document it, right? It was his job. But I think though, as much as that can be correct, that photo was proven that actually had some serious consequences for the family of this potential victim. Okay. Yeah. The victim was never really identified. There's two different identities there on the table, but there were serious consequences for this family. And I think it's all about as well, especially in today's world where we've seen so much. We've seen how a certain photo with people going viral and whatnot, like how a certain photo can affect someone so deeply, that I think we should have a more probably like conservative perspective on that. I just think the way the world is, I mean, everything has its positives and its negatives. I feel as though because of social media that was built and primarily sold as something that, you know, can put you in touch with a lot of people, right? And I know it has worked for me. I mean, I've found a lot of awesome people that watch the channel, that we have a lot of stuff in common. But yeah, thank you. But it has a negative aspect to it. Combining this with what we've been talking about of photography surrounding the D word, I think it's just the fact that, you know, we have to at least consider the things from someone else's perspective.
As we're talking about kind of how we view death and shock, you know, crime scene photos and how they can be very gruesome, very disrespectful, there is still people are trying to create death images in a respectful and artistic format. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't seen it, Walter Schels. I could put a link below and keep the information in the show notes, but he produced what I feel is a really, really beautiful series of portraits of willing participants who were kind of in the final stages of an illness, and they were a lot of them, I think, had kind of accepted the fact that they were dying, and he would take a picture of them beforehand, and then after they had passed away, he would take a photo. And it is very interesting, and quite like, because just before they've died, of course, you see, yes, they're just looking at a camera, but you can see kind of the life experience, depending what age they are, just kind of, there's a lot of different emotions that you can see, and I think it goes beyond the fact that you know what the photo is representing.
Absolutely.
And then there's the photo afterwards, and it's taken in a really beautiful way, as if the subject is sleeping. But for me, it's one of those, I highly recommend anyone look at it if you're not too averse to kind of seeing images of the deceased. But this would probably be the most respectful I've ever seen, and it is quite beautiful. A lot of them are in black and white, and it just kind of, I think it's a lot about the acceptance of death and how there shouldn't be this kind of taboo, fear, or all the kind of negative connotations about it. Because, like, I mean, it is kind of, without being too kind of morbid, you know, it's a guarantee for everyone and everything. So why not kind of hit it head on? But let's be, for me, I think there's ways of kind of connecting with it in a better way. Yes, you can be entertained by gory movies.
This is true. But then again, this is another way where photography can come in as a medium that has the capacity to portray things in so many different ways. And I know that obviously this relies on the eyes of the beholder who looks at it, but also the eyes of someone who's photographing it. But still, I think it's super important to highlight these people that are doing like really good work in a sense of like making us look at things through photography with a different mindset or in a different light. I'd put it this way. I think that's a very good example.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, you know, you are seeing it through the photographer's kind of maybe how he's viewing. I mean, it is something, a project like that, you can see the reason behind it and how different people can interpret it, as opposed to just someone snapping
as well and stuff like that. And I think it is kind of an interesting experiment. And yeah, we'll leave links to that one down below. I actually have an example. And by the way, guys, if you're watching this, because I know we're going to have like an audio only version, but if you're watching this, I highly recommend you reading this book. And yes, this is not an ad or anything like that. Sally Mann did not pay me. But I came across this book when I was working on a video about her photography. And if you know Sally Mann or you've heard about her, you know that she was very well known for her taking photographs of her immediate family, which is actually the title of one of her books. And it was, her children. And it was very controversial in the 90s because these photos included nudity and stuff like that. And so there was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of backlash. But anyways, Sally Mann is someone that, evolved from that work, and she then went on to photograph landscapes of the South. She's actually, if you guys are not familiar, she's actually based in Lexington, Virginia. And anyways, in her later body of work, she actually photographed in a place called Body Farm. Now, I didn't know what this was until this is like literally the last chapters of the book.
You're in for a treat.
You're in for a treat. And this is super, super interesting because I had no idea that these places existed. And when I actually looked at the title of it, I thought it was just the title of a chapter. I didn't realize this was a place. And apparently it's not just one place, but it's several places. I believe they exist outside of the US as well. I don't know if it's the same name, but in the US, they're called body farms. And they're basically allocated spaces, usually within the university campuses and the university kind of like different universities. I'll probably leave some, on the show notes below. And these are spaces where basically unclaimed or donated bodies of animals or people to basically decompose. And it's more of a way of, I think this is called anthropologists and forensic sort of like disciplines.
Yeah, I think
to learn more.
Yeah, a lot of them, from what I've read, it could be slightly different, but a lot of the bodies, I suppose, are left in kind of slightly different environments. Maybe you'll have one that is left out under the sun, or you might have one that's left in maybe a slight pool of water. So the idea is, I suppose, trying to figure out helping people, I suppose, that are training to be able to solve murders, how they're going to be able to do it by, I guess,
also from a natural scientific point of view.
Yeah, seeing what happens to the bodies.
And so Sally Mann actually went on, and she tried for many years to get access to one of these facilities that I believe was in the University of Tennessee. And she then got kind of through the New York Times, I believe, she got an assignment to photograph there. And she had always been very fascinated with death, her family and her dad. She talks about it in the book. And she produced very, very interesting images. And she kind of talks about, like, I'd say her way of seeing this is more like, it's a documentary, but it's kind of the embodiment of what we've seen with the mortem or post-mortem photography and then the crime photography. It's objective documentary, but there's a sort of soul to it.
Yeah, there also is there is purpose, and there is, I guess, and a final reason for doing it.
So basically, she takes a lot of beautiful photos, and she just talks about like the idea of it being a passage. And actually she got to observe how bodies were decomposing, and she kind of like named them and everything. But it's not so much of like making lighthearted out of this, but it's more to see that yes, it's kind of like, it's still a part of us, our body. It's kind of like a vessel. She talks about it in this way. And it's so interesting to see this. And I think this is why I chose this to be our last example today, because I think this is where we find at least a somewhat of an balance.
Yeah, middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. Because in a way that is respectful, but also serves a purpose of knowledge, and scientists and other people from forensic and not just forensic, but anthropology and all of that, to learn more about what happens to our bodies. Hopefully that can be helpful for us while we're living, because hopefully,
for want of a better expression, I suppose, like scratches and itch, satisfies a curiosity about what happens to us in the way after we die. So obviously there's some things we don't know.
Super cool, because she's someone as well that during her photography, and you're welcome to go and watch the video on YouTube, she is very caring about what she does.
Yeah.
Like she puts a lot of, effort into what she does. And I think like judging from that way and judging this body of work on its own, forgetting like, it is a subject that is taken with some sort of care.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, at the end of the day, I think it's just the right way for me to go about it.
Yeah, it's a horrible, and there is obviously the morbid curiosity.
I think it's super interesting, and overall I think it's been a very interesting episode. And of course, like, this is valid for, what we've been discussing today, death. But I think, even looking at life, other things like beauty, like I said, I think it's super interesting to discuss photography in this way of like serving as a document, but also kind of obviously as a witness, but participating in the way we see who we were, like kind of.
I mean, it's
like
always
society.
It's a filter. No matter what you say, it's a filter.
But anyways, yeah, I think that's all I've got to say today. Do you have anything to add?
I mean, as I said, it's one of those things we could probably talk for hours and hours on. Yeah. So I would be very interested in knowing
I'm kind of
what you guys think.
Her fascination with it. I don't know. Are you going to do something to me? Is that what's the story?
We'll see. You just do a close-up of me there. But anyway, that was pretty interesting. Again, yeah. I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks. If there's any other interesting examples or books, or just in general how you guys feel about the various forms of post-mortem photography, or even post-mortem film, as we touched on, in the different types there are out there and the reasons behind it. I'd love to hear a bit more about it.
Same here. And I would like to as well thank you for watching, and thank you for, just like supporting the channel and supporting our new venture. It really means a lot to us. And also, of course, on a, closing note, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this podcast, MPB, for, trusting us, giving us another chance, another avenue of being creative. So I really appreciate that. So if you guys want to go buy, sell, or trade anything in MPB, you're more than welcome to. Links will be down below. Anyways, I think it's been all for today. And so I'm just going to say my goodbyes. I hope you guys, keep in tune with the channel and with our podcast here.
Slán leat, goodbye in Irish. Had to throw it in somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, guys, it has been a pleasure. I hope to see you soon. Take care, stay safe, keep learning photography, keep tuning in with the podcast.
And keep it weird.
Peace.